Achilles tendinopathy and its management, surgical management, specifically about one particular procedure. So let me go into it, right? So Achilles tendon disorders are now grouped under the term tendinopathy. It's a syndrome of pain and swelling. So what basically happens is here is a tendinosis, which was previously known as tendinitis. That term is no longer used. It is broadly divided into two types, insertional and non-insertional. Eventually, the result of tendinosis is a tear, which is a discontinuity. It can happen either after a trivial trauma or it could be spontaneous. So this is the syndrome that affects Achilles tendon due to degeneration. So basically, we have two factors here: intrinsic factors and extrinsic factors. So there is in contribution of intrinsic factor is overweight people, diabetic mellitus, malalignment of the heel, hind foot especially, and there is extrinsic factors, sports and athletic activities, use of steroids and quinolones. So what is the pathophysiology here? The pathophysiology is basically repetitive microtrauma. Repetitive microtrauma leads to injury to the tendon, which does not heal properly, and the reparative process also does not take place properly. So there are factors, as I said before, intrinsic factors that contribute to this, which is diabetes, overweight, age-related changes, and extrinsic factors. These extrinsic factors can cause this microtrauma, sports and athletic activities, use of steroids and quinolones, which can alter the tendon structure and everything. So the degeneration of tendon that typically happens at 2 to 4 centimeters proximal to the insertion on calcaneal process. You can see the bump here. So this is typically where you have insertional tendinopathy of the Achilles tendon. So what is the pathanatomy? The hallmark of Achilles tendon disorder in this condition is tendon degeneration. So what happens in tendon degeneration, to briefly summarize, is there is a loss of parallel collagen structure, there is a loss of fiber integrity, there is fatty infiltration and capillary proliferation. So without further ado, I'll go into the investigations. So degeneration manifests as increased thickness. So what are the investigations to check for this? There is an abnormal appearance on MR imaging. So thickness, which we typically check in the axial cuts, greater than 6 mm is diagnostic of Achilles tendinopathy. X-rays may show bone spurs and tendon calcification. Remember, bone spurs are not per se a cause of Achilles tendon disorder, but it can be a consequence of Achilles tendon disorder. So it's very important to know the distinguish. So here on the left side, you can see Achilles tendonitis and Achilles tendinopathy of the left foot. So we have a typical bone spur present. We also can see a sharp hump bump deformity, the typical Hageland's deformity. On the right side, the MR imaging, we can see altered signal changes. There is a hyperintensity just at the insertion of the Achilles. So this is all classical of insertional Achilles tendinopathy. So there is a grading that we use on MRI. There are three grades basically, and grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3, depending upon the diameter and the uniformity of or the presence of degeneration. Anything less than 6 to 8 mm is considered as grade 1. There is very minimal degeneration. Anything more than diameter of 8 mm, less than 50% of tendon involvement is grade 2. More than 50% of tendon involvement is grade 3. So here we see a T2 image where we can see the Achilles tendon on the posterior aspect. So this is a normal shaped Achilles tendon. There is no thickening. You can see an inner concave border, outer convex border. There are no intensities or hypersignal changes present within the substance of the tendon. And on the right hand side, we can see a typically thickened tendon. There is a convexity that is present here, and there is altered signal changes within the substance of the tendon. So this is a patient who has an Achilles insertional tendinopathy. So treatment can be broadly summarized into non-operative and operative. I'll briefly touch upon the non-operative treatment protocol. So we can have eccentric exercises. This has got the highest recommendation amongst all non-operative management. Usually it is reserved for grade 1 disorders. So the next therapy includes extracorporeal shockwave therapy. There is a recent accumulation of evidence which supports its use, but the recommendation is still grade B, it's not grade A. Some people still do use night splints, and there are some biological injections that are being used. Insufficient evidence, nothing to tell us that this really works. So operative treatment can be divided into three parts. There is initial calcaneoplasty, where typically we do the resection of the Hageland tubercle. It can be done by an endoscopic method or it could be done by an open method. It is always combined with an excision of the retrocalcaneal bursa. There might be some debridement of tendon involved, but there is no tendon repair involved in this procedure. Next, we have a debridement, usually done by and we combine this repair with either a FHL transfer or an isolation. So when do we do FHL transfer? We'll see further. Endoscopic or open calcaneoplasty, there is a literature is not kind of dicey on this. They are saying there are some mixed results. We're not very sure about the outcome of this, but we do recommend this procedure with strict selection criteria for optimal results. Make sure the Chauvet-Leutte angle is greater than 12 degrees. Fowler-Phillips angle is 70 degrees. Typically, better would be a sum of Fowler-Phillips as well as a calculal inclination angle with grade 1 or grade 2 changes on the MRI. So this is your classical Chauvet-Leutte angle. So which is the division between the calcaneal inclination angle as well as the Hagelin angle, alpha minus beta. If it is greater than 12, it is significant. And this is your Fowler-Phillips angle. Both of these angles are checked on standing lateral films. It is very important to make sure we take standing lateral, not on supine lateral films. So this is a patient with insertional Achilles tendinopathy. She was investigated further. Tendon degeneration was minimal. The typical Hagelin deformity could be visualized here. The angle was greater than 75 degrees, which is significant. Post arthroscopic Hagelin resection, the angle has come to 60 degrees. Patient is reporting very good symptomatic relief. So now we come to the open repair techniques, typically used after Achilles tendon degenerative tear, or sometimes the tendon degeneration is so much that we do create a tear and we repair it. So what are the three commonly used procedures? First will be a single row suture anchors, single row footprint anchors. But the latest technique that has been developed is speed bridge double row technique. So what makes this superior? So there are studies which have found that patients who have been treated with double row fixation have shown significant greater AOFA scores postoperatively when compared to single row anchors. And the pull-out strength comparison, you can see here the BioSwell lock fiber tape has got the greatest pull-out strength when compared to the other fixation device typically used in single row technique or in the footprint technique. Speed bridge double row technique, to briefly summarize the technique, these are the steps that involved. A midline skin incision is given. The Achilles tendon is divided and detached from the calcaneal tuberosity if it is already not torn. The tendon is debrided to ensure the degenerated part is excised. The Hagelin's resection is then performed. A double row drilling is done for the fiber tape insertion. At this step, we decide whether we do an FHL transfer or not. And after that, we do a knotless reattachment. We'll send some videos for this. This is the midline skin incision. So this skin incision is typically given over the Achilles tendon extending up to the tuberosity of the calcaneum. The paratenon is then separated. You can see the paratenon being separated. So once the paratenon is separated, the Achilles tendon is split midline. It is then detached from the calcaneal tuberosity on either sides. So there's, you can see one side being detached. The other side will also be detached. So once the Achilles tendon is detached, you inspect the Achilles tendon. We are now debriding the tendon, which looks unhealthy, typically yellowish, not the pale white color that is typically associated with a good tendon. So once the tendon is debrided, next comes the Hagelin's resection. So we identify the deformity here, the hump bump deformity of the Hagelin. So you see the calcaneal, we use a power saw and then osteotome to resect the deformity. This also provides a good footprint for the reattachment of the Achilles tendon. So once that is done, the double row marking is done for the drilling. So you can see there is one proximal row, there is a distal row. So this is drilling done. The K-wire is passed. The purpose of using this K-wire is to ensure that the drill holes are parallel and not convergent. Both rows are drilled. Yes. Once the drilling is complete, the K-wires are then placed. So now we are going to insert the fiber tape with the suture anchor. Yes. So this is a swell lock peak suture anchor. So this is typically inserted into the proximal hole, the proximal row, right? So the fiber wires are two in usage. One is the blue white, another is the black white fiber tape. Sorry. So it is then passed into the Achilles tendon proximally. One side is passed. The same is done for the other side also. So now we are checking whether we are able to achieve reattachment in neutral plantigrade foot. So this crisscrossing is important. The white fiber tapes are brought together and the blue as well as the black tape are crossed and brought on either side in a figure of 4 manner. And now we perform the knotless reattachment. So the crisscrossed fiber tapes are then inserted into another anchor, a peak anchor here. It is now inserted into the distal holes. The laser guide is used for marking and appropriate tension. The tension has to be maintained and the fiber tape is inserted. The same is done on the opposite hole as well. All the time it is imperative that the tension is maintained. So it is important that you educate the assistant as well. And just look at the position of the foot. It is still maintained in neutral. It is not brought into excessive plantar flexion. This is how the knotless reattachment is done. So when do we do a FHL transfer? FHL transfer is typically done when the degeneration involves more than 50% of the tendon substance and when the age of the patient is 50 years. So this is how we identify the FHL tendon. It is identified anterior to the Achilles. Yes, it is dissected up to the lower border of the tarsal tunnel where it has been separated. Modified Krakow's technique is used to tag the FHL. It is now passed into the calcaneum. Yes. While maintaining tension, you can see that this person is holding it with a tensioner, with an artery. Tension is maintained. Again, the ankle is kept neutral. We are able to check it has been fixed with an interference screw and the ankle movements are checked. To conclude, speed bridge double row fixation provides the best pull-out strength amongst the all possible techniques that are available for degenerative Achilles tendon tears. Knotless technique is simple and easy to perform. It does not require complicated procedure, complicated steps, complicated knotting techniques as well. FHL transfer not just improves the plantar flexion strength, it also offloads the degenerated Achilles tendon, thus allowing faster healing and earlier rehabilitation to take place. As I told before, this provides a very good recovery period without immobilizing, without the need for a prolonged immobilization. Thank you. Any questions and doubts?
So, Dr. Neeraj, how can we see the questions now, which delegates will put forward to Dr. Venkatraman?
I will paste it. In the meantime, you can ask him a few questions.
Okay, Dr. Vijay, anything you would like to ask Dr. Venkatraman?
What is the indication for your Haglund excision and reconstruction?
Sir, as I had mentioned before, we take a radiological standing lateral film, X-ray of the foot. We calculate the Chevalier angle and the Fowler's angle, Fowler-Philip angle. We commonly use the calcaneal inclination angle and add it with the Fowler-Philip angle. Anything above 90 degrees is considered as pathological and we perform a Haglund's resection.
So you clinical criteria for Haglund excision.
Sir, pardon, I couldn't hear your question once again.
You do all cases only on depending upon your radiological criteria. You don't see any clinical criteria.
Clinical criteria, typically patient has pain and there is a swelling that is seen over the heel at the insertion of the Achilles tendon. Patient has tenderness at the insertional point. So this is the clinical criteria that we use. Then we combine it with the radiological criteria and do a Haglund's resection.
But what standard guideline is to have a course of conservative treatment before
Of course. So I'm only talking about conditions where we have failed conservative management and patient has developed a degenerative tear or has an impending degenerative tear that is going to happen.
Okay. And
Yes,
one more question. These kind of deformity with insertional tendinitis,
yes,
do you have any experience regarding the Jade castectomy?
pardon, sir?
Do you have any experience regarding Jade castectomy being conducted for these kind of cases with insertional tendinitis?
No, sir. No. We don't. I don't have such experience with any osteotomy procedures.
Okay.
Hi, can you hear us?
Yes,
Yes.
sir. Okay, I see some questions in the chat.
Yes, sir. There are 3 questions on the chat, sir.
First question is there any age below which we should not do the surgery, like younger patients around 40 years?
Dr. Pratik.
Sir, rather than keeping age as a criteria, we would like to think of the underlying etiology as the criteria. If the patient has a degenerative tear, and if it is usually it happens after a trivial trauma, and MRI also shows some degenerative changes, in that case we perform this procedure. If it is traumatic tear, then go ahead and do the repair, direct repair.
Okay.
The next question is, do you give
Is
post-op
Dr. Pratik?
cast?
Can you unmute yourself?
I am unmuted, sir. Hello.
Can we know who is the other person?
Yes. So did you answer all the 3 questions?
No. He's going to answer the second
sir,
question.
I was just on answering. I heard someone talking, so I just stopped.
Okay. Sorry.
Neeraj, can you control that somebody else doesn't talk?
Yeah. I have done it.
Okay.
The second question is, do you give post-op cast and for how long and which cast, above knee or below knee? No, we don't give any post-op cast or anything. We do give a below knee slab that is maintained in 10 to 15 degrees of plantar flexion. This is typically done only up to suture removal, which is probably 2 weeks. At the end of 2 weeks, patient is off slab or off cast. We give a walker boot with a heel raise, air cast walker boot with a heel raise. That is usually contained for another 4 weeks or so. And then after that, patient is shifted to a routine footwear. So no cast. Question number 3, how many months will you wait before you will advise surgery to the patient? Typically, patients who are coming early with pain or symptoms that has been, say, recent onset, and we do put the patients initially on a trial of non-operative management. So if non-operative management fails, if physiotherapy, heel raise, and all that fails, and patient complains of persistent pain, and then we proceed with an MRI. We first take an X-ray, and then we proceed with an MRI. An X-ray and MRI supports our diagnosis, and we find that the tendon degeneration is quite severe, grade 2, grade 3. So in that case, we would like to proceed with surgery before patient develops a degenerative tear. If patient does present with the degenerative tear, there is no role for non-operative management. We go into operative management. Any more questions, sir?
Sir, may I add a comment?
Yes, sir, please.
Regarding the post-operative rehabilitation, I what usually do is put a slab for 7 to 10 days itself. I start full weight bearing after 7 to 10 days without any boot or any other things. We can, this is a very good technique and it gives a very good reconstruction. So I think you can start weight bearing as early as patient is pain-free.
So you do it without any air cast walker. That's
Yeah. I don't use any air cast or other things. Only slab for 7 to 10 days. Then if patient is pain-free and patient is comfortable, then we'll start early weight bearing. That is the biggest strength of this technique, I think.
All right. So this protocol, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Sorry. What I was going to say, Vijay, is that
Yes,
most of the literature, if you just look at, almost everybody, follows a routine of making the patients walk in an air cast shoe. Now, this trend of using an air cast shoe, I don't know whether we really in our country, looking at the cost, we have to follow it or not. But one thing I have seen, patients are very comfortable walking in air cast shoe right on day 3. So that's what I do. I just give a bandage for 2 days. And when I change my first post-op dressing, I put them straight away into the air cast shoe. And they hate to get into a slab or a cast because they want to move around, they want to walk, they want to do weight bear. So what air cast shoe basically does, I mean, are you clear of that? What air cast shoe does in these kind of cases? My question is to Vijay. Are you clear about what an air cast shoe does
So
in these?
it gives a very good shock absorber kind of support with a cushioning to the heel, and it prevents swelling also, I think.
Okay. So what my feeling, my understanding about the air cast shoe is, it has multiple functions. First, it reduces the post-operative edema. 2, it has a rocker bottom sole. So there is a rollover. Rollover means the stance phase on the affected extremity is shortened. So these 2 roles are important in any post-operative condition to have the less of the load on your repair, which is probably not possible if you are giving a regular shoe. So that's why these 2 things, if patient can afford, are always an advantage, I mean, in post-operative phase.
Okay, sir.
Venkat, do you agree with me or you have some other view about it?
No, sir, I totally agree with you. I completely agree with you. My only question is, sir, so we mobilize as early as patient is able to weight bear. At that point of time, when we are mobilizing on an aircast walker boot, do we give a heel raise?
Well, if the patient cannot stretch to the neutral position and he's uncomfortable, or when you check him at the time of changing your first dressing, that he actively cannot bring his foot into a neutral position, because what you are doing during surgery is you are stretching,
Yes.
you're stretching the tendon, and you are forcing your, all the tape and everything to bring it to neutral position. But the moment the patient is awake, conscious, and his Achilles tendon is little tight, calf is tight, gastrocnemius muscle is tight, he probably will not be able to actively bring it to a 10-degree neutral position. So that is the judgment you have to make in about giving a heel raise.
All right. Thank you, sir. Any more questions, sir?
So if there are no more questions, I think we'll proceed to the next talk. And I'll share my screen for the next talk. Can you stop sharing your screen, Venkat?
Yes, sir, I stopped sharing, sir.
All right. So I'm visible.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, it's visible, sir.
Okay. So let's talk about today chronic lateral ankle instability. Well, this terminology is probably new to few people, but let me start from a basic thing, that this terminology comes from basically tear of lateral collateral ligament of the ankle. So that is the starting point. And if this ligament doesn't heal adequately, the rehabilitation of the patient is not to the normal life, and then probably there are symptoms and signs of chronic lateral instability. So what are these symptoms and signs will come later, but let us first understand that how this thing is relevant to us. If the lateral collateral ligament injury is undiagnosed or undertreated, it can lead to permanent lifestyle modification. Somebody probably will not be able to come down the slopes properly. Somebody would not be able to run. And if ignored to a great extent and symptoms continues, then it could even lead to an early osteoarthritis of the ankle joint. And this is very relevant to the professional athlete because he may just lose his job. And sports loving people who like to jog, run, play, they just can't do all these things. So that's the relevance of now understanding the lateral collateral ligament tears, that entity, and treating it well. So lateral collateral ligament complex, we call it, because it's just not one ligament. There are three distinct components. The anterior talofibular ligament, which is not itself just one ligament. It has got two fascicles, a superior and an inferior fascicle. And then we have calcaneofibular ligament, CFL, and then we have posterior talofibular ligament. So three distinct components of the whole lateral collateral ligament. Now, recently, it has been shown that these ligaments are not isolated ligaments. They are not just standalone ligaments. There are some interligamentous connections which connect them. And the amount of injury to these interconnections probably plays some role in different kind of symptomatology or a different kind of recovery process in different individuals. Now, if we look at this biomechanic data, that what ATFL does. So ATFL is tight when there is internal rotation of talus and when there is inversion in a plantar flexed ankle. It is tight till there is a failure load of maybe about 100 newtons at which it fails, means it tears. On the other hand, the failure load of CFL is about 130 newtons, and of PTFL, which is supposed to be the strongest ligament, and it is tight in all positions of inversion, whether in dorsiflexed ankle or a plantar flexed ankle, but it has a very high failure load. So that is why the tears of PTFL are rare, but commonest tear is of anterior talofibular ligament because the failure load for this is lowest. And the commonly occurring sprain, or what we call ankle sprain, is what it is taking in inversion in a plantar flexed ankle. And as soon as the failure load or this load increases to more than 100 Newton, the ATFL will tear and CFL may get stretched and elongate, either during one episode or during repetitive episodes of such failure loads. The CFL tends to elongate unless the failure load increases to more than 150 to 200 Newton. Then the probably CFL will start failing. So ATFL failure, if untreated, what will be the clinical implication? During the plantar flexed ankle, there will be an extra kind of instability of the ankle joint, which will increase if two ligaments are torn. But if PTFL is torn due to a very severe load, there'll be a complete dislocation of the ankle. So usually we don't see in this sprain a complete dislocation of ankle. What we see is ATFL failure and the instability resulting from the failure of ATFL. So what will be the symptoms of chronic lateral ankle instability? So either the patient would present with repeated episodes of instability, and sometimes these episodes will present with acutely painful injury. So These instabilities are more on uneven surfaces. So there'll be a very clear difference in the patients who are walking on a very smooth surface like at home versus when they are walking on a road or on a pavement. Similarly, some people may not have painful episodes, but they will have repeated giving way of ankle on regular basis. And this would just, restrict their active lifestyle of playing and involving themselves in the sports. And they would modify their lifestyle, or they would probably seek a medical treatment. Now, when a patient approaches us with this kind of symptoms, our duty is to examine him clinically and do certain tests and ascertain this instability. So in the physical tests, anterior draw test is one of the tests which tells us about the integrity of the lateral capsuloligamental structure. Then the inversion test or stress radiography in the inversion, as you can see, this is a normal without the stress of inversion. And this is an ankle which is opening just by 2 to 3 mm during the inversion. And this you see more than 4 mm opening during the inversion test is pathognomic of an ATFL plus CFL tear. The MRI pictures, it can present in different ways. It can show a frank tear if done early, but if it is done later stages, maybe by the time the patient has taken a rehab program, conservative treatment, and then it is still not improving, then what you see is a chronic scarring. Chronic scarring is seen by an altered signal of the ligament. So instead of looking at this ligament to be jet black, you see it a little grayish, And then another thing which you can notice is probably that there is a wavy kind of a structure rather than a straight line, So this is typical in the axial section, which are so-called snowman view of the talus. So always look for the snowman appearance of the talus if you are looking for ATFL. So this is the anterior part of the lateral malleolus to which is showing the ligament attachment. So we know that all acute ligament tears are to be treated conservatively. The conservative treatment is basically RICE plus REF plus as soon as the pain relief takes place, it is to be followed by a rehab program of physiotherapy. There is, in today's time, no role of cast. So in sprains, cast rather inhibit the maturation of the ligament into normal working ligament. So they should never be given. And now everybody goes through this rehab period, which can be from 3 weeks up to 3 months. And sometimes if the patient is constantly improving but not has improved fully, the rehab program can go on for sports people up to 6 months. So is there a role of any surgical treatment in acute sprain? Well, this is debatable. Debatable because we have not given this ligament to undergo a natural recovery process or rehab process. But in very high-end athletes who don't want to waste time, for whom a 6 months period of rest or looking at it will probably not be a good idea. So what we do, we give them a RICE for maybe 4 or 5 days, start physio, and look for the progress in a week's time. So by the end of about 10 days or 2 weeks, we subject them to an MRI and look at the clinical symptomatology, look at the progress they have made, look at the MRI picture, and we do today consider a surgical repair in them in high-end athletes if we find there is a convincing evidence of a complete tear. But for all other cases, who are not high-end athletes, who are people like you and me, or maybe a very recreational sports kind of people, the end point of conservative treatment with symptomatic instability is labeled after a full conservative regime of 3 to 6 months. That is, even after that, if they continue to have symptomatic instability, we call them chronic lateral ankle instability. So I don't think so that once you label them as chronic lateral ankle instability, but rather nobody in the world thinks that now they can be treated conservatively, or you still expect physiotherapy to bring about the improvement. So surgical treatment is the mainstay in this case. And the various techniques I'm just going to discuss here, which are non-anatomic reconstruction, anatomic repair. So anatomic repair could be done open, could be done arthroscopically. Non-anatomic reconstruction is just a brief mention here because it still appears in our books, in our textbooks, and you have read them during undergraduate times, postgraduate times. I am just mentioning them, though it is almost given up. So the procedure like Watson-Jaw, where we reroute the peroneal tendon through fibula and attach it to talus, or a small procedure where Evans, where we route the peroneal tendon through fibula only, and an elaborated procedure mentioned by Chris Maslow. So all these, they use peroneal tendon, So these procedures have a drawback. What is the drawback in comparison to anatomic? Because you take out a tendon, and so there is a loss of dynamic inversion strength. There is also an incomplete restoration of ankle biomechanics while doing these repairs. And there is a high incidence of sural nerve injury. So in today's time, these non-anatomic reconstruction is not considered to be a good thing after these chronic lateral ankle instability. So what is the in thing? The in thing is anatomic reconstruction, though it was first reported by Brostrom and hence named after him. So what he did, he utilized the direct repair of native tissue of the ligament using a double breasting tweak or imbrication. And this does not use any surrounding tendon and so preserves the dynamic action of the peroneal tendons. Later on, Carrison modified his technique by shortening the attenuated ligament and attaching it to the fibula, which is most often done nowadays. So what we do nowadays is basically modified Brostrom repair, where we reattach the ligament by imbricating it, shortening it to the anterior end of the lateral malleolus. Then there came another augmentation of this Brostrom repair, which was described by Gold, and hence the procedure became Brostrom Gold repair. Now, what is this Gold modification? Gold modification is attaching the lateral portion of inferior extensor retinaculum, which is lying just a centimeter distal to the ligament, and bring it over to the fibula, the lateral malleolus. It improves the strength of the anatomical repair without any complications. So if you see this photograph, this picture, this is what Brostrom repair original is. Directly repairing the torn ATFL ligament. And this is the extensor retinaculum, which is present in the foot just about a centimeter distal. So it is pulled and brought to the anterior margin of the fibula and sutured here to the periosteum over it. And this augments the Brostrom repair. That is why it is called Brostrom Gold repair. So let's have a look at how we do now Brostrom Gold repair. So the lax ligament is transected very close to the fibular periosteum is raised, and now this anchors the fiber wire is passed, and it is imbricated, brought close to the fibula, and while we are doing this repair, we are keeping the foot in neutral position and maybe about 5-degree inversion or eversion. And now this is the extensor retinaculum, which is being brought close to the fibular, distal end of fibula. So after this, we have another method which has come up, is instead of augmenting our repair with only extensor retinaculum, we add an internal brace fiber tape. This is an extra articular augment. So after we do the rostrum repair, we add a fiber tape which has a very high failure load compared to the native ATFL. So what it does is it acts like a check rein or a seat belt to the native repair. And the patient can undergo an early rehabilitation and weight-bearing ambulation. So let's see what we do. So after we have passed 2 anchors into the distal end of the fibula, these suture anchors are yet not tied. What we do is at the isometric point of the talus where the ATFL is attached, we pass 1 fiber tape with swivel anchor, hold it there, and then we do the normal repair. And then this suture tape is tightened over this by inserting the other end into the distal fibula. So when we are tightening it, we see to it that we don't over tighten it. So one of the mosquito tip is kept under this tape to prevent the over tightening of this fiber tape. And so this is called internal brace augmentation. Such patients, they do not require any POP slab or immobilization. And as soon as it permits them to bear weight, they can be allowed to bear weight with an air walker shoe. There is another kind of augmentation which sometimes is required under certain special situations. And this is done instead of a synthetic fiber tape, this is done with a tendon. Now this tendon could be either a semi-tendinous allograft or an autograft. And this tendon repair can be done before we do our rostrum tissue repair. Because this is a biological repair and this is an intra-articular augmentation. So what we do is we route this tendon from talus to fibula and then reroute it to the calcaneus to sort of duplicate the ATFL as well as CFL. And then we do the rostrum repair of the native ligament. So this was described by Dirkman and Freckle in 2015, and the indications they quote for this are an ankle laxity which is severe, about if there is a difference of 10-degree in talar tilt on inversion compared to the contralateral side, or if there is a failed previous reconstruction, or when we have a patient who has a very poor quality tissue for the anatomic repair, or he is a very, very obese, morbidly obese patient whose BMI is more than 30. So these are the certain situations where we would like to do biological augmentation with a tendon. The trend in the last 10 years is switching towards an arthroscopic rostrum repair. So what is the advantage in arthroscopic rostrum repair? Well, it doesn't disturb the soft tissue layers of the skin, subcutaneous tissue, and so a good vascular environment is left for the healing and maturation of the rostrum repair. So it allows a faster healing and return to active lifestyle. And The only flip side is that when you are learning to do this, there is probably a little higher incidence of complications because you are doing everything through a keyhole, you know. So how is it done? We have two techniques for arthroscopic brostrom repair. All inside technique, whereby the ATFL is grasped with a fiber wire and anchored to the distal end of fibula at the footprint using a knotless anchor under appropriate tension. And what is the second technique? Second is an inside-outside technique. Now, inside-outside technique gives us an advantage of passing our fiber wire first through the ligament and then through the extensor retinaculum. So this simulates the Brostrom gold repair. It is an augmented repair, though done arthroscopically, while the all inside technique is just the repair of native ligament. So as you can see here, this square mark, this marking which is done is close to the upper border of calcaneus, and this is about 1 centimeter lateral to the superficial peroneal nerve, and that's how this is a safe zone through which our fiber wire should come out of this particular rectangle, which is corresponding to it is 2 centimeter from the tip of the lateral malleolus, and this is the area where your extensor retinaculum lies. So these threads are coming out from inside to outside. That is why it is called inside-outside technique. So these sutures are then tightened and tightened in such a way by making a subcutaneous tunnel that they go and the knot stays close to the fibula, like in normal Brostrom gold repair. So let's see. So this is what I'm performing here. Now, the important thing to understand is that in all these arthroscopic repair, you need an arthroscopic system as well as the C-arm, because you've got to confirm that where your anchors are going. So here on the C-arm, we are seeing where my anchor is going, you know, and that's a peak anchor being put into the distal end of fibula and delivered through the lateral portal of the ankle arthroscopy. So after these suture anchors are delivered from the lateral portal, then we have to use a micro lasso. This micro lasso under vision passes through the ligament and then passes through the landmarks which we had made, and it comes out of the skin and it has passed through the ligament, it has passed through the inferior extensor retinaculum. So after all the sutures have been delivered, then we make a small incision, and through this incision, we pull all these sutures through the one single central incision with a hook. We deliver them like this, and all the 4 strands of fiber wire are delivered like this. And now we make a subcutaneous tunnel. As I was just telling you, we first see that every fiber wire is free, you know, there is no kink, and you are working on the right kind of pair of wires. I've deliberately not shown you the inside procedure because that's a little complicated to comprehend. So what you're seeing is what is happening outside. So outside, what is happening now is you are doing something like an open Brostrom gold repair, but you have passed all your sutures under arthroscopic vision. So that's how you tighten them. So here we are doing a Brostrom gold repair using an arthroscopic technique. Mind you, rest of the principles remain same, holding the foot in neutral position to mild eversion at the time of tightening your fiber wire. And you proceed from posterior to anterior. So that's what probably is latest. No, this is not the latest. There are some newer insights. Besides the arthroscopic repair of the anterior talofibular ligament for chronic lateral ankle instability, there are people who are, giving us a concept of micro instability. According to them, people who are mildly symptomatic but are symptomatic for a very long time and don't show a very equivocal draw test and equivocal MRI findings, probably one of the superior fascicle of the ATFL gets torn while the inferior fascicle remains all right. Or probably some of the interconnections are intact, which are responsible for not a frank instability, but micro instability. So we can diagnose these problems arthroscopically. We can look into the footprints easily arthroscopically and understand them well. And if we find that it is only the superior fascicle tear or attenuation, passing one anchor and repairing it all inside, or probably doing again a Brostrom gold for it, will make the patient asymptomatic. So these are the newer insights we are working towards. And I hope in coming few years, there will be a white paper on these kind of problems as well. Thank you.
Sir, there are a few questions, sir,
Yes, sure.
from the attendees. There are 2 questions on the chat box.
Can I go into chat box? I have to stop here first?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now I can see the chat box. Choice of tendon graft, when and where? Peroneus versus hamstring. Okay. So when we are facing a patient who has CLAI, the peroneal tendons are giving you dynamic eversion. These are the dynamic muscles for the hamstring, for the ankle. While a simple gracilis or a simple semitendinosus, which we have been using for our ACL also, is a better choice. Now, next question is, when do you decide to stop the conservative treatment? So 6 months again is probably the deadline, because the maturation of a torn ligament gets completed in 1 year under the best circumstances. But when we are talking of no improvement, that means the circumstances are bad. Either the original tear was too bad, or the initial treatment was not adequate, was not in the right approach. So in such people, even 6 months, if the patient continues to show improvement, you can continue conservative treatment for a year. But I think if 6 months doesn't give a satisfactory improvement on conservative management, then you should call it a day. You should offer your patients. Well, it has to be supported by physical tests and the MRI picture at 6 months.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah.
Sir, many a times we have patients who have ankle sprain who don't get back to normal life even after, say, 4 to 6 weeks. They still complain of pain. They have difficulty in walking. Instability does not manifest at that time, but persistent pain remains. And we are now at a point where we cannot offer them surgical management at this phase, but we are also not going to put them on a cast and say you walk on a cast, and until then wait and watch. We still wait for 6 more months before we proceed for a surgery. So what do we do for those group of patients where they don't recover at the expected rate, but we can't still push them to 6 months cutoff also. What do we do for them, sir?
So my idea is, I mean, what I follow is that the day this patient comes to you, whether it is 3 weeks, whether it is 2 weeks, whether 4 weeks or 6 weeks, first thing is draw a picture, because people do not understand what the ligaments do and how important they are. Everybody thinks sprain is a lighter, is an inferior kind of a trauma compared to a fracture. While we know that healing from bone to ligament is a more difficult proposition compared to bone. All right. So we got to make this concept understood to the patient. Patients always do not understand the extent of ligament tear. So first thing is make every patient understand that ligament tear is more serious than a hairline fracture or a small displaced fracture. Point number one. Point number two, after he has understood, then you give him an ankle brace, tell him to restrict his activities, tell him to go for therapy, maybe for 2 weeks a continuous, and then twice a week session, and give him a rehab program to follow for next 2 to 3 months, and have once a month checkup. Ask him how is he improving. Maybe do a VAS scoring. Ask for specific things like how does he feel walking on a pavement? How does he feel walking downstairs? How does he feel coming down a slope? Okay, so these are certain points which you tell him that you have to notice these, and that's how you pass next 6 months. If the patient every visit consistently says, no, I am no good, then you start talking about the surgical management in the last visit when he's about to reach 6 months. You just give him an insight about what we do in the surgery, so that he is mentally prepared that he doesn't have to suffer lifelong. He should be ready to undergo surgery if he's not recovering. That's my approach.
All right.
Sir, I have two questions.
Yeah.
Are there any different indication for open procedure and arthroscopic procedure, or the same indication do you follow?
No, there are no two different indications. It's basically the outcome, functional outcome at 1 year is same, nearly same. Only thing is the recovery is fast, and to some extent probably the stiffness is less, and the arthroscopic repair has a better AOFAS score at 1 year compared to the open rostrum mold repair.
So how do you decide, sir, which patients are going for open? Like,
well, first of all, you should be sure that you can do it arthroscopically, because it's got a learning curve, okay? And you have the infrastructure available. It is far more expensive to do an arthroscopic repair compared to an open repair, far more expensive, because you need an RF, you need a good shaver blade, you need micro lasso, nitinol wire. All these cost a lot. They are not made by any Indian manufacturers, each and everything so far. So they are a lot more expensive. So finance is one reason where I have to look into. And the second is the younger the patient, the more keen to participate in the sports activity, more I am inclined towards arthroscopic procedure.
okay. So other question is, when you are putting a anchor in the lateral malleolus,
Yeah.
do you use the same working anterolateral portal, or do you put a accessory portal?
No, same working lateral portal.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
So if there are no more questions from the audience, Neeraj, can we proceed to the next one?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so now I invite Dr. Vijay D, who's an additional professor at AIIMS, to give us few tips and tricks about improving the outcome in management of pilon fractures. Over to Vijay.
Thank you, sir. after such a wonderful talk, it's onus on me to finish very nicely to end this wonderful symposium. So my talk is mainly on how to get a best outcome in an pylon fractures. All we know that it is interchangeably used with the plafond. Plafond, which is a French term, which means mainly the ceiling or roof. Pylon is basically a distal wide part and a proximal narrow part. That is how it looks like a distal tibia. That's how the pylon has come to exist. So I'll cover my lecture under these headings. So form form is the most important for getting an best outcome is to do a preoperative planning and soft tissue management. That's the most important. Then the wound management. All in between these two things uh, do help to get a best outcome, but all depends upon how well your preoperative planning is and how well your soft tissue management before intervening surgically. So before this paper, what people used to think about pylon fracture, it is a completely non-reconstructable fracture. Because of its outcome, because of its complication, people used to fear to reconstruct. So after this paper by Rudy and Algover, from their experience, they have showed that there are excellent outcome with these kind of fractures, and they followed mainly a 4-stage surgical approach while managing these kind of fractures surgically. Mainly, their idea is to maintain a fibular length, then getting an articular reduction, and fill any metaphyseal bone void if that is existing, and buttress the medial column. So their main idea is to have this 4-stage approach, and they have published this paper in 1968, and they have showed that we can get a good outcome with these kind of fracture. But many of US surgeons after this paper, they could not reproduce the result, the kind of Rudy and Algover they have showed to the world, mainly because of soft tissue management and mainly because of wound complications. But when you review all those publications, there's a strange difference between Rudy Algover paper and other US surgeons in terms of velocity of injury and in terms of a patient selection in this in the paper by Rudy and Algover. In Rudy and Algover, most of their patients are low velocity injuries and without any soft tissue compromise. So they're able to get a very good outcome. But the same could not be reproduced by many others where their patients were mainly high velocity injuries and there was compromised soft tissue. So after 3 decades of this original paper, we got another landmark paper where more or less they have standardized the treatment in a staged manner. If there is a compromised in skin and soft tissue, and there is any compound fractures, that should be managed in a stage protocol, and it is a standard now, where in a first stage you try to control the local damage that has been done to the skin and soft tissue, and later on you do and go and fix in a second stage. So the next question is, once you get on this fracture, do you want to get a scan straight away or a span? So my idea of treatment in whether to scan or span, if it is a low energy trauma or low velocity injury, which is usually because of rotational injuries that you can easily identify with the clinical examination on radiographs. If it is a rotational injuries, usually those are low velocity injuries. If it is a fracture because of axial load, where the talus is impinging and the plafond and getting a fracture, is more commonly because of high velocity injuries. So there's a different approach to the kind of injuries you are getting. So if you know that it's a low velocity injury with your examination and the radiographs, then straightway you can go to the CT scan, identify the fracture, then you manage further. If it is a high velocity injuries, always span first, get a ligamentaxis, get a fragments in position, get aligned it first, then you scan it. If you scan before spanning, then most probably that you will not get any information regarding the surgical management, regarding the things you want to do further later in the course. So this is a example of high velocity injuries with a axial loaded, and in these kind of patients, always span first, get fragments aligned, get the ligament axis in place. Then if you get a scan, this is the patient with the compound fractures where you have spanned first, then you have to scan. Otherwise, there is no use of scanning before spanning. So the all we know that advantage of spanning these kind of fractures, apart from it is getting fragments in place, it reduces swelling, it reduces the any impingement on the skins. You can take care of the pressure on the soft tissues, and it also helps to prevent further infection by when doing a spanning. You definitely do a lavage, very good lavage, so that will prevent most of the infections. So then you should get a scan. So as I told, the role of CT scan, and I feel the surgeon should know how to read a CT scan. The surgeon should read themselves who is going to operate, and I'll give some tips and tricks how to read a CT scan so that you can plan your surgery very better after this talk. So the one example where you need a CT scan, many people they say there's no need of CT scan, but nowadays it's a standard dictum that's interarticular fractures always get a CT scan. There's one such example where in X-ray you can see you can you cannot appreciate a fracture so easily, and if you look carefully, there might looks a fracture in the anterior part of the tibial plafond. Otherwise, it looks pretty good. But when you get a CT scan of the same patient, you can see there's definitely displacement of the fragment in the anterior part, and you see the anterior part of the tibial plafond, how it's displaced. So role of CT scan definitely changes your plan of management. If you're thinking of conservative, definitely if you get a CT scan, you might think of doing a surgical management. Turner et al. Study, they have shown that after CT scan, the operative plan, position, posture, everything changes once you do a CT scan and read a CT scan. Best way of reading a CT scan is to get all the three sagittal, coronal, and transverse, and put a long axis of y-axis on the parallel to the tibia, and the transverse axis just 3 mm above the tibial plafond. Just place the transverse axis parallel to the joint line, 3 to 4 mm above the tibial plafond joint line, and the other axis is parallel to the tibia, and keep all the three sagittal, coronal, and transverse in front of you. Then you read the X-ray. I'll show some of the example how you should read an X-ray. This is one such example. The long axis is parallel to the tibia, and other is parallel to the joint line, 3 to 4 mm above the joint line. Then you should plan. You should see the fracture line, where are the fracture lines are going, whether it is a anterior, posterior, and further you should divide how the fracture pattern is there. For example, if the when you are taking transverse section 3 mm above the joint line, you should see whether the fracture lane is in the anterior part or in the posterior part. That will give you an idea whether you want to go anteriorly or you want to approach this fracture through posterior. And it also gives indirectly the position that you should do during the surgery. If the fracture is in the posterior lateral part, that is a Folkman's fracture, you ideally go through a posterior approach, and depending upon the associated fracture, if there is no associated fracture, just you go through a posterior lateral approach and handle this Folkman's fractures. And if the fracture is in the posterior middle part, like this, and your approach is posterior middle rather than posterior lateral. So if you understand your fracture pattern better, you can do planning and you can you can do planning, and you can same planning should be taken into the OT, and you should perform the surgery as you thought before the surgery. And if the fracture is in the anterior part, then definitely there is no use of going from posterior aspect. You should think of anterior approach, mainly anterolateral, anteromedial, depending on the where is the fracture fragment. And if it is chopper fracture, where the anterolateral fragment, definitely you should approach through anterolateral, not from the medial aspect or anteromedial aspect. So reading a CT scan gives a lot of insight into your patient, lot of insight into the surgery you are going to perform, and it will decide what you are going to do in an intraoperative time. So for me, the most important is to read scan by yourself, understand the fracture pattern, where the fractures are there, and what are the fragments are there. That decides your intraoperative things, and that decides your outcome later on. And in the sagittal plane, if the fracture is on the medial aspect, you should think of going from the medial aspect and fixing through a buttress plate from the medial tibia. So one such example where I have already shown this high velocity injuries, and we do a span, then you can fix, do a span, external fixator initially, then wait for the skin and soft tissue to heal, then you scan it, then you plan surgery. In this case, you see the fracture pattern here. Mainly the fracture is in the sagittal plane, and there is one more fracture line which is in the anterolateral aspect of the tibia. So it will decide your approach. You are definitely going to do a anterolateral approach where you can buttress this fragment, anterolateral fragment. Then you can add a medial buttress plate in this case. And the position definitely it would be a supine position where you approach anterolaterally and a medial aspect. So reading a CT scan is most important for me after soft tissue management. Another such example is a fracture in in X-ray. You hardly see any fragment. Where is the fragment? You can't see the displacement also. So if you get a CT scan and if you see the transverse section here, definitely you see there is the anterolateral fragment, and there is a medial fragment which is extending into the medial aspect, causing a medial malleolus fracture. So this will give your idea how to go about it, position and approach in the intraoperative period. So I'll not tell real about the approaches. It is beyond this talk. So I'll just mention important things that you should do while performing different approaches in pilon fractures. In anterior approach, mainly in the most common thing that can occur in the pilon fracture is the anterolateral fragment or Chopard fragment, where you can approach through anterolateral aspect. The care must be taken because of the close proximity of superficial peroneal nerve in the approach. And the anteromedial fragment, where very rare compared to the anterolateral fragment, where you can buttress and fix the fragment. In a posterior, you have to decide whether you want to go posterolateral or posterior, depending upon the fracture pattern that I have explained to you. Most important is if it is a posterolateral fragment, and if you want to approach posteriorly, you should try to think whether you are adding another skin incision anterior or medial. If you are doing a anterolateral incision along with posterior, so your incision should be little more posterior compared to the direct lateral to give a very good skin bridge between the two incision. So the trick to fibula fixation is to put your incision as posterior as possible, anticipating any further incision in the anterolateral aspect or other incision, so that adequate skin bridge can be placed. And if you are fixing fibula and there is a posterolateral fragment is there, you can do well with a single approach, that is extensile posterolateral approach. That is a new in the approach to the pilon, and one should be aware of this extensile approach if you are just handling the fibula fracture and the posterolateral fragment, which can be done with a single approach. So one such example where the posterolateral approach has been used to fix the fibula posteriorly, and the posterior fragment is fixed with a lag screw. So once you do a approach, once you go into the fracture, then the most important is to expose the fracture, have a good reduction, then do a definitive fixation. So I like to have these kind of instruments in my armatorium for my fracture reduction fixation. I love this Cobb's retractor and definitely Weber's clamp. Everyone needs it. And ball spike, which when it is very much necessary when you are buttressing a anterior posterior fragment, and then put a temporary fixation using a K wire. So femoral reduction is very much necessary for articular congruity, to maintain articular congruity and articular reductions. And the reduction should be done under visualization or with the help of the fluoroscopy. And one must care to lift the fragment if it is impacted fragment. If it has to be reduced, you should lift up and you should give a structural support with the use of the bone graft, the autograft using a cancellous bone, or you can place a bone substitute also. And provisional K wire should be placed in such a way that the further plating, there should be enough place for further plating or screws where you want to put the lag screws. Definitive fixation, you should start with, I usually start with the posterior to anterior, where most commonly the avulsed fragment of the posterior aspect, then fix the posterior aspect, then go anteriorly to have a very good reduction in the pilon fracture. Then we can't get the best outcome without managing the associated fracture, though it is not common, but the talus fracture is the commonest associated fracture in a pilon fracture. So if there's a talus fracture, always fix a talus fracture to get a dome below the plafond. Then you go on fixing a pilon fracture. Wound management, it decides your fixation, it decides your reduction and other things, because these are the most common complication in a pilon fracture. Do a very good capsular repair and deep fascia repair. Then I usually use, if there is a skin, if you feel the skin is little more tensed, then I usually use Algor Donati technique of suture for the skin instead of vertical mattress or horizontal mattress. The study which shows that Algor Donati technique of suturing has a better incision perfusion across the incision compared to the vertical mattress, and there is good healing compared to the vertical mattress. There's some example which I want to show. If you see this X-ray, you can't decide where is the fracture, whether it is a medial or whether it is a lateral. So definitely your CT scan will help. Where is the fracture fragment? You can see here the fragment is mainly on the posterolateral aspect. So your approach should be mainly on the posterolateral and fix the posterior fragment, then go on to fix the other fragment. The another such case, the high velocity injuries with articular fragments going into the metaphyseal area. Once you reduce this metaphyseal area, definitely will end up having a metaphyseal gap. You should fill with, you transport the cancellous bone from above to the subchondral bone, or you can use a substitute to support these articular fragments. Otherwise, there is high chance of collapsing these fragments. CT scan, definitely it's going to help to decide your approach and position. Here you can see the fracture completely comminuted, which is there on the sagittal plane and transverse plane, and you should fix anteriorly and posteriorly and medial also in this case. So take home message from my topic is soft tissue management and CT scan assessment by the operating surgeon will decide your outcome more than anything else. Thank you. And I also invite you to attend this symposium first time conducting to know how to set up a bone bank next week. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Any questions for Dr. Vijay D on the chat? Can you stop your sharing so that we can see the chat box?
Okay, sir.
Dr. Vijay?
Dr. Vijay, I have a question for you, sir.
Yes.
You were talking about initial spanning of high velocity pelon fractures. Do you combine a fibula plating at the time
Uh,
of initial spanning? Or if you
no,
do, when do you do it?
I don't plan a fibular plating in the spanning time, but definitely I want to maintain a fibular length using intramedullary wiring or any temporary fixation, because as we know that we are going to have a definitive fixation later on. So I won't prefer plating at the spanning time.
All right, but you do put a wire across the fibula.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Percutaneous wires, of course, you can do, but that does not interfere in taking a approach to fix the fibula by a plating. You can then go anywhere around, play around anywhere around, even if you have one percutaneous wire. Vijay, my question to you is, you in one of your CT scan pictures, you showed me a multi-fragmentary pilon
Yes, sir.
where there are multiple fracture lines in sagittal as well as in the coronal planes.
Yes, sir.
So please guide us as to what is your approach step by step in handling these kind of multi-fragmentary, multiple axis fractured lines.
So most of these fractures are high velocity.
Yes.
When the axial load comes, that is the kind of energy we need to have a multi-fragmentary discontinuation in the articular fragments. So most of these patients definitely will have a compromise in the skin or soft tissue. First, you try to manage skin and soft tissue. Decide yourself if you think spanning is a better choice, just span it first. Then get a ligamentous axis and fragment in place. Then get a scan. Then, as I shown to you, read scan accordingly. And as you have mentioned in your scenario, that multiple fragment in coronal and sagittal plane, and the approach should be accordingly. And as I approach and fix posterior to anteriorly manner, so I always go and maintain the, if there's a fibular fracture, maintain the fibular length first. So that will give lot of help to me to reduce the posterior fragment. So I will go and reduce the posterior fragment and fix temporarily using a thin K-wires if in a subchondral place, keeping plate and a lag screw in anticipation where I'm supposed to put plate and lag screw. Then see, and if necessary, I'll add anterior plating and medial plating depending upon the fracture patterns.
Can you just go back to your share screen and show us that CT and tell us what would you fix first? How will you keep your patient? What will you fix first? What, just maybe with
Yes.
your arrow, tell
Yes.
us, can you just fix, go back to the share screen, show us
I think
that.
you are talking about this case, sir.
Yes, multi-fragmentary, yes. The last one which you showed us, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in this, you can see there is a fracture in the transverse plane, that is coronal plane, and there is a fracture in the sagittal plane. So as you see, there's a external fixity is in place that will give a very good distraction, and it helps for to know whether the article conductivity can maintain it or not. So keeping a fixator in place, then I'll go approach posterior, sir, where you can see the fragments here. The posterior lateral is also there, and the posterior mid is also there. So my idea in this case is to have a T plate kind of thing where it can buttress both posterior middle or posterior lateral, or if you're not able to buttress one of the fragment, you can add one more 2.8 mm thin profile plate to fix the fragment which are not purchasing through a T plate. So this is what it's done in this case. The posteriorly I have used a plate to fix a posterior lateral fragment, and using a lag screw or a free screw to fix a medial fragment, sir. Then I have added a anterolateral buttressing plate to maintain the stability at the anterior fragment, and the medial plate as a kind of anti-glide principle, mainly from medial column to the rest of the column.
So basically, what I want the delegates to know is that we do two different positions. We start with the prone position, then we close the posterior wound, then we flip over the patient, put him into the supine position, and then start working on the anterior, anteromedial, and anterolateral fragments. And most of the times, we take anterolateral incision as a workhorse incision, and for the medial part, we try to do MIS because that's which can be approached by MIS technique, and you don't give too many incisions. So your basic incisions are one posterolateral and one anterolateral, and rest the medial part is by MIS incision. But yes, you do flip over the patient from posterior to a supine position, and these are very exhaustive kind of exercises. You must have a good team, good infrastructure, and a dedicated, supporting staff for doing such kind of injuries. Am I right, Vijay? Do you support
Definitely,
this?
sir. Definitely. In this patient also, we did in the same manner. We went through a posterolateral approach first, but we didn't do a prone position, sir. It is a kind of floppy lateral kind of posture where you can change the posture later on to completely supine instead of complete prone position.
Okay, yeah. So that's another view. Yes, a floppy lateral and then changing it to supine position. But there are certain surgeons who feel comfortable, doing first in complete prone position because the fragments they are very easily visible to you in a complete prone position. And fixing a plate, it definitely takes shorter time in a prone position compared to in a floppy lateral. My past experience about posterolateral incisions and posterolateral fragment, doing them in floppy position versus doing them in prone position, I always feel more satisfied looking at my fragments in prone position. It takes shorter time also. And so I am for the complete changeover from prone to supine position.
I completely agree, sir. It will give a lot of idea about the fracture, and fractures are
And your CT pictures are also very clear, once you are in complete prone versus complete supine rather than floppy lateral,
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Your fluoro images, they make a lot of difference. Yeah.
Dr. Vijay, there is just one more question. In the last case that you had just shown, the X-ray with comminuted distal tibia fracture,
Yes.
where you had initially spanned with an X-fix, what prompted you to continue the spanning X-fix even after fixation?
No. It is intraoperative images. There's and we maintained in the postoperative period also because we have not put any bone substitute in the metaphyseal void, and we want the ligamentotaxis to maintain. And if you see the, I'll share the screen and I'll show to you.
Yeah, please.
If you see this, there are multiple articular fragments. We cannot fix and each and every these small fragments. So we want nature to take care of, when we maintain the articular congruity, we want nature to take care and heal these fragments. And we can do, the best thing we can do is to have a congruent articular surface in the interpreted. But in this particular case, we are not sure of absolute stability. So we want to have that ligamentotaxis benefit for the patient. So we maintained it for 2 weeks. Then we discontinued the fixator and we put it on slab.
So you continue slab also after removal of fixator?
Yeah.
All right, sir. How long do you continue it?
Mainly around 3 to 4 weeks, depending upon the stability you are confident of. Otherwise, if you are really confident of the stability, then 7 to 10 days till the soft tissue healing. Then you can start on passive range of motion. Then weight bear definitely after the once you see the union.
So any more questions to Dr. Vijay D for this thing? That was really nice insight into the tips and tricks and how to, approach a complex pilon fracture. Dr. Vijay, thanks a lot.
Thank
And
you,
I must thank Dr. Venkat for giving us a nice elaborate insight into the Achilles tendinosis, which is the new word rather than tendinitis. The degeneration of the tendon is to be considered whenever a tear takes place. And with the aging population, more of aging population, this is becoming more and more common. And so we must understand this entity and manage it. So I thank all the delegates who have attended this particular webinar, and we hope that it has added something to your existing knowledge. At least I happen to learn a lot from today's webinar, and I'm happy that I'm going a little wiser after this webinar. So thanks everybody to come and spare their time, and they have given their deliberations. And thanks to Biotech people who gave us the platform. Thanks to Dr. Neeraj who gave us this platform to reach our colleagues and to give this academic session to benefit all the orthopedic community. Thanks everybody. And if there are no more questions, Neeraj, we are happy that there were about 192 attendees for this particular webinar. We hope that all of them have benefited in some way or the other. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Shoaib. Shoaib, over to you before we finished it.
Thank you so much, sir. And from behalf of Biotech, sir, we want to thank you, the panelists, Vijay sir, Venkat sir, and special thanks to yourself, sir, Kamal sir, for taking the platform and giving some wonderful insights and making this discussion more healthy and making this webinar successful, sir. There were a good number of attendees, sir. By the time it went, currently there are more than 192 panelists, and we had some good healthy discussion also. And Biotech will be looking forward to have more such wonderful webinar meets and to get engaged and definitely to share your knowledge, sir. Thank you so much, sir, and have a wonderful evening.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night, sir. Good night, sir. Thank you so much, sir. And special thanks to Ortho TV also, sir, for making this platform.
Yeah, yes, special thanks to Neeraj. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
So this number is only for Ortho TV. Facebook, we haven't got the number. So I think this number will be more, sir.
Yeah, that's okay. But this is quite a reasonably good number. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes. Yes. So it was an incremental process. By 7:30 it was 150. Then by 8 it went to 180. Then in current we have